It came out of a meeting over coffee with our founder, Chris Lees. So we just sat down and started chatting, and it turned out she had a degree in agriculture and always loved working with animals. And then she started studying homeopathy, and she just said to me, "Have you ever thought about teaching farmers how to use it?" And I said, "No, but you know what? That's a really, really good idea. Let's do it."
We had students from 6 different time zones, and it was crazy because we were introducing ourselves, saying, "Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night," to so many people. We had students from Kuwait, from Australia, from America, from the UK, from mainland Europe. Oh, it was crazy. Well, it was wonderful.
So I have a patient who has had 2 big farms. She said, "Listen, when we first took our big farm over, half the animals were sick. They were so sick, Annie, we didn't know what we were going to do with them. We were spending £150,000 a year on vet bills." She said, "After I studied with you and I started applying these little tiny simple remedies," she said, "I got our vet bill down to £5,000 a year." Jayne and I together developed like a protocol. And it's very, very simple because
today we welcome back Homeopathy at Wellie Level, or HAWL, who previously also was on episode 88. But we've got a couple of different representatives of theirs today. We have Annie Batchelor and Jayne Lyons on the show. Now, Australian farmers and pet owners, and also those in New Zealand, this one's for you because they actually have, for the first time ever, a course that is in a Australia and New Zealand friendly time zone that's coming up. So if you want to register for that, it starts on the 15th of April. The website is hawl.co.uk. So you can find out a bit more there. And if you know somebody who has a small holding or a large farm or just works with a lot of animals, please forward this episode to them because we can really make a huge difference in the lives of so many animals and farmers if we teach them how they can use homeopathy. So thank you so much for listening, and check out hawl.co.uk.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout podcast, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now our mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout, where today we don't have just one, but 2 lovely guests for you from the UK. We have got Annie Batchelor and Jayne Lyons from Homeopathy at Wellie Level. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
I have to have a little giggle because I had Rachel Welsh on from Homeopathy at Wellie Level a few episodes ago now. It was actually episode 88, and we're now in like the 440 somewhere. So it was quite a long time ago. Yeah. And I have to admit, when she was like, Homeopathy at Wellie Level, I'm like, what is Wellie Level? I don't get it. And she explained that Wellie is obviously what you guys would call a we call a gumboot.
Gumboot level.
Yeah, so Homeopathy at gumboot level. So after she explained it, I'm like, oh, now I get it. And then I had to explain it to somebody today. I said, I'm talking to Homeopathy at Wellie Level, and they also looked at me a bit strange. And I was like, don't worry, I didn't understand what it was about either. But for those guys, I don't know what they call it in America, but certainly down under we call it gumboots. But in the UK, it's called wellies. So tell us about homeopathy at Wellie Level for those who haven't listened to episode 88. Annie, I think maybe you want to start because you've had like 30 years experience and you've been there right from the inception of it, right?
Yes. So it was curious how it happened. It's kind of evolved, but energetically, it came out of a meeting over coffee, as ever, with our founder, Chris Lees, and we were all at a homeopathic conference together. And I was trying to find out how to get hold of a cup of coffee. And we literally bumped into each other in this kind of weird cafeteria place at you know what universities are like when it's the vacation and it's kind of echoey and hollow. And we were very early arriving. So we just sat down and started chatting. And it turned out she had a degree in agriculture and always loved working with animals. And then she started studying homeopathy. And she just said to me, "Have you ever thought about teaching farmers how to use it. And I said, no, but you know what? That's a really, really good idea. Let's do it. And that was it. That was the get-go. It was very quick after that. We met as a veterinary homeopath at the conference, and very, very quickly we formed a team of 6 people. And from the very early meetings, I knew in my head, I kind of had a very clear idea of how I would like to deliver that kind of course, because I'd already been involved in teaching people. So I kind of had my handle on what the course objective should be and how to break it down into bite sizes. So it just flowed. Honestly, it was like we were all meant to work together, and it just flowed. It was quite incredible how quickly it got established. So yeah, that's our miraculous story of the beginning of HAWL.
I really love that. And I don't think we actually have that part covered in episode 88, because I certainly don't remember hearing that part, but that is really cool. Plus, I was talking so much at the start that I forgot to ask you the main question that I ask all my guests when I start. And Jayne, it's your turn after Annie. Annie, how were you first introduced to homeopathy? I'm doing it the wrong way around today.
Well, I have probably a unique now story, but it would not have been unique when I was growing up. So I grew up in a rural town in Worcestershire, and we were very lucky. Our local GP practice was actually a homeopath. They were called the Doctors Marshall Wilson, and they had for generations been homeopaths. So I didn't know really what was going on. I trotted along one year with some, like you do when you're a teenager, bad period pains and so on. And this lovely guy just listened and nodded sagely and asked me a few questions, and just made me feel so relaxed and so trusting in him. Gave me a little script to take along to the local chemist. And then I realized things were slightly different. When I got home, I undid this envelope, and inside were these tiny wax paper folds with a powder inside. So this is how the old school used to do it. And I think a few people still do. So also my parents were into naturopathy and growing their stuff organically way before it became a thing. So by the time, speed forward, I go to university, and this has been my life. I keep bumping into people who know about what I'm talking about. This is quite a novel experience, for some of us, because we're way out on the fringe here. In between my growing up and going to university, homeopathy started to be talked about a little bit more. And I got referred to a GP like you used to sign on when you went to uni. I don't think this happens anymore. And you'd go meet your GP. Does this sound quaint or what? And this man, who looked to me like he was about 104, said to me, "Oh, my dear, what have you been treated with?" And I told him, and he said, "And what were you given?" And I said, "Well, do you know, I think it was something called HAWL or something." And he went, "Was it indeed?" And he kind of twinkled at me and he said, "Well, that was homeopathy, my dear. How fortunate you are." And I thought, oh, okay. So now whiz on, and I'm doing my postgraduate qualification. And I'm literally next in a big workstation room. I'm literally next to a French woman who is bringing in all these remedies. "Oh," she says, "has anyone got a cold? I have this wonderful remedy from France." And so every time we had a hangover, she produced Nux vomica and stuff. So then, after a long story, I got married, we ended up in Cornwall. We had our own small holding, but I had to finish off a teaching contract in Birmingham. So I'm driving down, and one Saturday morning, I got up, and downstairs on the mat was a flyer from the first ever homeopathic college, attending you had to drive up to an annex in Devon somewhere. But it was the first ever homeopathic college. To this day, I do not know how this leaflet got delivered to my door, because we were still in the process of moving in. Well, dear listeners, the rest is history. I applied and got accepted. Amazing. And that's it. It changed the course of my life. And I realized I could study and just loved it. The first weekend I went on an attending course, I felt like I'd come home. It was the most extraordinary feeling. I loved every second of it.
You have given me
loving it.
all over goosebumps. That is Definitely one of the best intro stories. And you know how we always joke, like homeopathy will find you if it wants you? It'll find you. Like that flyer like appearing at your house. I think you would have been struck down by lightning if you didn't become a homeopath.
100%. And, I could bore you for hours. It's a really good after dinner story about the journey to go to my interview because it was just awful. Every obstacle was put in my way and I was so determined to get there. And they waited for me.
Wow.
It was just incredible. I was hours late as a result of bank holiday traffic and all, because I'd never lived in Cornwall and I had no idea what holiday traffic meant. And I'm like, oh yeah.
And you didn't have a cell phone that you could just like text them on my way.
No, we're old school. You hardly had a main line.
Wow. Holy moly. Well, you are a great educator. I love your storytelling. So it's great that you're able to combine the education with the homeopathy and actually get it out that way. It's great.
My real reason for studying was I had a small holding with animals and I learned fairly early on how scary it was to use the veterinary side because there wasn't always an answer to the situations I was discovering. And, I did that thing that Hahnemann did. I thought, I can't give anyone any chemicals, any treatment that I have a worry over what it's going to do to them. And I know he felt that about his children. So, just to fill in the blank there about my contact with animals. So,
Oh, I love that. I've used homeopathy on my animals for years as well and saved a lot of vet bills along the way. Vets are wonderful, so grateful for them, but I always think if you can save your animal the stress of having to load them into a car, take them to a strange place, why wouldn't you?
Indeed.
Jayne, I would love to hear your story of how you found homeopathy or how it found you.
I would just like to say that we are so blessed that actually, Annie, you made it to that teaching course and that they waited for you because you are just, you're fun. You're absolutely fantastic. I'm very much in awe of you. But in terms of sort of my journey, it's probably a little bit more mundane than Annie's, but I've been using homeopathy since I was extremely young without even realizing it, actually, because my mum, the eldest of three, and my mum has always used it with us in conjunction with allopathic medicine when we were growing up and continues to thrive, bless her. And I think when it was really whenever I was pregnant, as many people's stories are, I think with my daughter, I started to become a little bit more curious as to, okay, well, what is it all about, actually? I've been taking these little white pills for, 30 odd years, but I really wanted to explore the reasons why and how. I think I just became a little bit more curious. I was actually in British Army for 20 years, so quite a different calling, if you like, whenever I was younger. I don't know if anyone's heard of the second stage of life, but they say that, sometimes when you're in your sort of late 30s, 40s, even early 50s, you can not necessarily change course, but who you are and your sort of raison d'etre can change. Your reason for things and being can change. And I think I've definitely found my second stage of life, most definitely. So after I was pregnant whenever I was still serving in the army, and I was fortunate enough to be able to take nearly a year on maternity leave. And at the time when I was just going on maternity leave, we also moved. I live in Wales now. And my homeopath, who I've been seeing from you, family friend as well, suggested that I go to see a wonderful teacher and homeopath called Linda Gwilym, who runs the Welsh School of Homeopathy here in Wales. So I went there as she was very experienced with pregnancy, childbirth and young children as well as everything else. So I went there, and I think this is, again, like Annie, is where the universe just sort of comes in, whether you want it to or not, just to show you where you're supposed to be. Because as during one of our consultations, I saw a leaflet that was advertising the Welsh School of Homeopathy's introduction day to homeopathy. So it was only a day, and I was on maternity leave at the time. So I thought, oh, well, I'll just go along because, I want to know a little bit more. So I did, and I was like, I need more. I cannot just do one day. I really want to study. So I explained my situation to her, in that, I was going back to the army, and I may not be able to fully commit to every weekend that was required if I was, sent away and so on. Although in the back of my mind, I already had an idea that, I've now got my daughter. I need to start my transition out of the army, give some stability. I want to be at home now. I've done my time. It's time to move on to something else. But I didn't at that point really know what it was. So they were wonderful. They said, yes, of course, I'm sure we can work around you. And so I started the course, and it was about halfway through that first year that I just knew that this was where my life was going. And so I set all of the plans in place, the motions to, I handed in my service, and I said, this is, and it was slowly progressing. And then again, the universe worked well, because I had a homeopath here in Wales who was looking after my clinic hours, etc. And she was wanting, or been thinking about, retiring after, quite a short period of, or, very soon in the future, which coincided almost exactly with whenever I was leaving the army.
Wow.
So she handed over her clinic to me and her patients slowly. They were I was introduced to them, etc. And that was it, really. There was no looking back. So I've now got my practice here in Wales. And again, the universe was calling, and I discovered HAWL, or HAWL discovered me, or we discovered each other, I think is probably the best way to describe it. I took over, my job title, if you like, is the secretary, which is, sort of organising, and I teach and taking on most of the responsibility for a lot of things. And
it's amazing. I'll just tell our listeners as well that HAWL is homeopathy at Wellie Level, because I know people will be listening and what's that? But yeah, just so if you hear us talk about HAWL in the podcast, that's what it is. So homeopathy at Wellie Level.
Homeopathy at Wellie Level /gumboot.
Yeah, you've both just given me a really good idea, because obviously I opened the Centre for Homeopathic Education in Australia, and clearly I need to print flyers. I don't know if flyers still work, but clearly you both found homeopathy through flyers. So I think I need to go make some flyers and just drop them random places.
I think if we were to start now, it would, of course, be Instagram and TikTok.
Social media.
I mean, it would be, I don't know. I mean, I have an assistant, Kate, who was my apprentice. So the other half of my life is I ran a full-on 4-bit-year professional course training practitioners. And we only closed it down just sort of as we were coming out of COVID. We'd done 20 odd years, and we were a team of women, and we all have busy practices. And I think we just got to I think COVID done us, it was like the joy of teaching for all of us was contact. And when we were working online, as useful as it is now in HAWL, because we can reach out literally. I mean, this week, Jayne, we had a farmer in Australia and farmers in Skye, the Isle of Skye. So, that.
Well, actually, Annie, do you remember the course that we ran? It was an online course last year, and we had students from 6 different time zones, and it was crazy because we were introducing ourselves, like, "Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night." So many people. We had students from Kuwait, from Australia, from America, from the UK, from mainland Europe. Oh, it was crazy. Well, it was wonderful, but
way up in Canada, Southern Ireland. Yeah, and what was really, really odd, Eugenie, is everyone had a little story to tell about how unusual the climate was becoming. So we had a farmer from way up in Canada. They had not had rain for 4 months.
Wow.
And that was so unusual. And we had the Irish farmer saying, "Well, it hasn't stopped raining here." It was just extraordinary. And, when you first learn homeopathy, you see in generalities, I love generalities, by the way, and you see that lovely sub-rubric of seasons and weather and wind. And then you think, well, how does this work when we're doing Southern Hemisphere or completely different climatic zones? And so I learned very quickly, when you're teaching people from different continents, you ask them, you say, what's your prevailing wind, or what season are you in? Because we're now coming up to an equinox. Well, Jayne and I know what equinox feels like, or should feel like in Britain and Northern Europe, but we don't have your experience of what it feels like in Australia. So that kind of, farmers love to talk about the weather, don't they? And how it's affecting the grass growing and stuff like that. So yeah, it has been an extraordinary ability to use that internet and to be able to offer the online stuff. But we still do have attending courses as well. We meet. Yeah. We're very, very fortunate. We have a farm in Tetbury owned by a certain prestigious person. Jayne, are we allowed to say?
Yes, we
surely
can
you're allowed to say. So
we're very lucky.
Prince of Wales, obviously now King Charles, which he's now handed down to Prince of Wales, Prince William. But it's part of the Duchy farm or farming group.
Yeah, and I mean, he's King Charles is vocal about using homeopathy. He's never hidden that fact, and that's actually a lot of people come to homeopathy, for that reason, because they go, well, if it's good enough for the royal family, then surely it's good enough for me as well. So they wouldn't be using it if they didn't know that it works. And he's had an organic. He's had an organic
Chris
farm
Lees,
for years. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, he has, and he's very, very. He's a wonderful advocate for them. And Chris Lees, our founder, she actually met him way back at the beginning, didn't she, Annie? At the start of HAWL.
Wow.
I think it was at Sandringham, I believe. And he actually, when he was then Prince of Wales, obviously, gave some money to help HAWL start, homeopathy at Wellie Level start off. So yeah,
it kind of comes by diverse ways, though, Jayne, doesn't it? We kind of get it via the ancient company of sheep wranglers or something like that. It's always, it's like we get bestowed, but yeah, over the years. But his farm that we're on in the Cotswolds is 100% organic.
Wow.
And the milking parlour, I got to tell you, the first time we did a tour around the milking parlour, these farmers were green. I mean, they were like, oh my God, he's got one of those. And the stock hand came out and he said, yeah, we've actually got the ability to play each cow their preferred music. I mean, come on. I don't know if he was teasing us, but what a great story. Yeah, they all get their chosen. Yeah. Isn't that great?
Oh, no, that's incredible. If anyone has any hookups for us, I would love to have King Charles on the podcast to talk about his experience with homeopathy. Can you imagine how cool that would be? Because he's been raised with it, albeit with his mum. Like the royal family's been using it since the 1800s. So I think Queen Victoria was the first one to introduce it. But yeah, it'll be so cool. If anyone can help me out with King Charles, that'd be great.
But Jayne, there's also a fantastic tradition in the British Army of using homeopathy.
Did not know that.
When we were living in West Cornwall, I had a patient who was a researcher, historian at the V&A, and she used to ask me all these questions about the people involved with it. And one day she said to me, do you know what? I'm going to go off and have a look in our research index. Now, bear in mind, this is pre-digital. So you physically had to go to the archives to find something. And her specialism was she was writing a book about an officer in the British Army in India. So that was her research topic. So she bumped up against homeopathy in his diaries. He mentions using these little pills. Isn't that cool? So she comes back for her next appointment and she's in a state of distress. And I said, Liz, what's the matter? What's the matter? Are you okay? She said, I am so distressed, Annie. She said, there's not one single reference to James Tyler Kent in our entire archive. And I said, are you sure? Because we'd been talking about the first repertory and stuff like that. And she looked at me and she gave me a very straight look and she said, there's only one reason for this not to be there. It has been removed. And it was at that point I started to realize that my rather optimistic Pollyanna view of homeopathy in the world wasn't liked by everyone. Because, you're probably like me, you probably think, well, anyone who's tried it goes, well, what's all the fuss about? Of course it works. But yeah, so we talked about it often. And she and her husband used to come see me, and they were both extremely serious academics, and they were shocked. They were as shocked as I was. So isn't that interesting? I think one of the benefits of the digital age is we are able to reclaim some of this literature and give access democratically to people, which isn't that fantastic?
That really is fantastic. I just wanted to check because you kind of answered it already, but HAWL obviously is available to any farmers around the world, which is great. And then you do that in person as well. But then you particularly have a Australia and New Zealand, or your first ever Australia and New Zealand course. Does that, you're not doing it physically in Australia and New Zealand, it's just like an Australia and New Zealand friendly time zone and geared towards Australia and New Zealand. Is that right?
Indeed.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about that? Like, what will you cover? How is it taught? When does it start? How do people join up on that?
Jayne, do you want to talk about you sort of the detail?
Yeah, sure. And then you can expand as you're very good at. So the sort of administratingly, I suppose, we're very excited actually because we've had several farmers and pet owners actually. It's not limited to farmers. We're not exclusive. And of course, the wonderful thing about homeopathy is it's not species specific. So, what works for a cow, a sheep, a goat equally works for a goldfish, a dog, a cat, a human. We're all animals at the end of the day. So although we obviously started initially for farmers, it's open to absolutely anyone who wants to learn more about how to use homeopathy with their animals and themselves, and their friends and family. And we've had several patients who have gone back after some of our sessions and come back to us and said, "Oh, I used this on my daughter, and it was amazing," etc. So we're not exclusive, but we've had several farmers from Australia and New Zealand on our courses. But we feel for them so much because it's middle of the night, extremely late at night with them when we run our time because it's UK time. So we decided that we would switch roles. We would be the ones that would be getting up very, very early in the morning to make it more accessible to farmers in Australia and New Zealand. So we've got our very first course starting on the Wednesday, the 15th of April. It's going to be from 4 to 8 p.m. New South Wales time. And it's 7 sessions. Just so the course content and the syllabus is exactly the same as what we do for the rest of the year. 7 sessions, 4 hours each week. 4 hours on Zoom is pretty much what people can stand with a couple of breaks. Any more than that, it just gets a little bit, your brain just gets fried. So yeah, 7 sessions starting on Wednesday, the 15th of April. We're very excited about it.
You're also clever to do it in April because then daylight saving finishes over east, and then there's only it's a bit less of a time difference to what you normally have. So that was good thinking.
Yeah.
We should claim that, Jayne. We should have said, yeah, that was deliberate.
Of course that was deliberate. It also fitted in with everything else that was going on. So
No, that's brilliant. So can people join the course? Do they have to join on their date? Because I'm just thinking of when the episode's going to come out. Or can people join if they find this episode, say, a week or two later after the course has started, can they still join in?
So I would probably say if they miss the first session, we can always catch them up. But we tend to say that actually you do need to come to every session because it's very progressive. And we take you we do start with assuming no knowledge whatsoever. And actually we've had, haven't we, Annie, some homeopathic first year students on courses who have taken our courses and they've said, wow, we actually have learnt in a different way, something different to even our human homeopathic course here in the UK. Yeah. So even if you have used homeopathy a little bit or know a bit about it, although we still go from zero knowledge or assuming that, so we start really back to introducing the principles, and Annie will talk about the syllabus. It takes you all the way through to then at the end, getting that remedy for the animal or human. And yeah.
And plant as well. Don't you do agri-homeopathy as well?
We mention it in passing, but that is such a vast subject in its own right. And I think it's quite transferable, once you've learnt the basic how to. So if you can imagine that what we're doing is giving, first of all, a very, very clear foundation. We're grounding them in, why did this method evolve? And what is the difference between, I like very much to point out the difference between conventional medicine and homeopathy, because I think it helps us explain and get over this idea of when we collect as much information as possible, why are we including so much diverse information about this animal? Because we're trying to build up a picture of a state. And that's so different from conventional diagnosis, when really you're doing the opposite. You're narrowing it down further and further and further until you just get to a basic description of what is actually happening in the pathophysiology. And it's that learning that construct at the beginning, which sets this template. And then they can add on stuff. So as we go through, and what's exciting about the online course is they do, in a kind of minor way, what we all do on big courses. They start with very simple stuff like tiny cases, and they end up with, well, now I've got this conservation breed and there's only 33 of them left in the country, and she's getting old and I want to look after her, but she's got arthritis. What can I do? So now we're looking at chronic diseases. So on the online course, we go right up to the whole of age and stage care. On the attending course, we don't have time to do that, but we take them halfway there. So yeah, and then what we do on top of that is we offer webinars. So these are like lunchtime specials where, you can eat your sandwich and tune in. And this week we did one on pests, parasite, ticks, fleas, and so on. And it's just another, in that one I talk about plants and herbs and tinctures and oils as well as remedies. So they're really good fun, actually, because you can scatter your seed wide. So yeah, it's the building blocks of it. So each day attending, if you like, each 4-hour block represents one more step of the ziggurat. We're gradually adding more and more and more information until at the end they are able, as we would say in people medicine, we would say, taking the case, analyzing what needs to be cured, repertorizing the symptoms that we've discovered. And that's an interesting journey, isn't it? When you say to a group of students, what are the symptoms? And they immediately, the ones who have not come into this with any prior knowledge will say things like, well, the milk count was up. Well, how do you know that? Did the cow tell you? So you have to take them back away from the technology that they've all been inculcated as farmers into doing certain things. Oh, well, she needed an antibiotic. Well, why did she need an antibiotic? So it's really, from our point of view, it keeps us on our toes, because what we're thinking about all the time is why does homeopathy do this? Why do we include this information? What's the purpose here? There must be a purpose. Otherwise, I'm a busy farmer. If you're not going to give me information that I'm not going to use at the end of the day, I'm not going to bother. Yeah. And it has to have results. So can I tell you a little story about what happened to me yesterday?
Yeah, please.
So I have a patient who has had 2 big farms, and they're in a bit of a transition at the moment. They're not sure whether they're going to get another farm or move away. But her last farm had between 250 and 350 milking cows. And she now does it as locum. She goes and helps because they're fixing up an old house. So at the end of her consultation, she said to me, Annie, are you doing another HAWL course? And I said, yeah, we've got one coming up pretty soon. Oh, she said, I really want to tell you how much I use the homeopathy on the animals I see. Even when I'm a locum, she said, I'm sneaking remedies in. And she said, I looked at her and I said, wow. I said, that's really impressive, that you're doing that. And she said, I want to do this. I've decided this is what I want to do. She said, listen, when we first took our big farm over, half the animals were sick. They were so sick, Annie, we didn't know what we were going to do with them. We were spending £150,000 a year on vet bills. She said, after I studied with you and I started applying these little tiny simple remedies, she said, I got our vet bill down to £5,000 a year. How about that? Honestly, I could have fallen off my chair. I love her to bits. I said, thank you so much for telling me, because tomorrow I'm going to be on a podcast. And that's the sort of information that we need to know, hey?
It would be so good to see a video testimonial from her, because I know Pat Ahern in Ireland, who obviously does a lot with, homeopathy and farms as well. He said the same thing, that it just, it makes economic sense when you're a farmer to use homeopathy. We had horses for a little bit, and the horse had colic, and it would have cost me $800 to get the vet out to treat the horse, but we treated it with colosynthus. And I think we used some slippery alum as well, and it was fine. So I saved myself $800. If you've got like lots of horses or lots of cows, why wouldn't you? And
exactly,
it's what we call a no-brainer here, isn't it?
And do you know what? If you're skeptical of homeopathy and you're a farmer, that's fine. Like, just if your cow's got mastitis, just give it some pulsatilla or whatever anyway. And if there's no change the next day, then call the vet. But just try the homeopathy. If it does nothing, that's fine. You haven't lost anything. But just give it a try. Like, what have you got to lose? It's like
I absolutely agree, and I'm constantly saying that. So in my practice this month, we've had a Labrador with an eye infection. That funny you should mention pulsatilla. It just sorted.
Well, just after I said that, I thought, well, actually, I would have probably used Phytolacca or Belladonna or Bryonia.
Yeah.
But pulsatilla as well.
But it's one of the most basic, frequently used remedies, isn't it? It's sometimes we don't have to make it more complicated. These little remedies are just so fantastic. And last week I had a golden retriever brought to me who's 12. She's getting on. She's got a bit of arthritis. But I looked at what was going on, and the owners came with 6 A4 sheets of blood tests. And I looked at this and I said, okay, so what's your understanding? Now, funnily enough, the owner is a scientist. And she said, well, it's not conclusive, is it? And I said, well, I'm glad you said that, because I'm thinking exactly the same thing. So here we are spending hundreds of pounds on all these tests and x-rays and ultrasounds. And at the end of the day, what have we got here? We've got an aging lady who is the equivalent of 84, and she's stumbling through the New Forest, but she's getting out every day, and she's having a sniff, and she's eating, and she's having a few cuddles. She just needs to be near the radiator a bit more. Isn't that cute? Isn't that a cute case? It's like having your mum brought to a consultation. And it's the same remedies. It's the calc carbs, the rust tox, it's the same thing. So yeah, it was, in fact, I ended up giving her chelidonium because she's got arthritis of the hip. So I was thinking, well, I do want to support liver function. She's struggling to digest fatty stuff. Well, she doesn't have much. And lo and behold, in chelidonium, we have arthritis of the small joints, i.e. wrists, ankles, and the low back and hips. Bingo. So I'll let you know.
Stay tuned.
Now, it was interesting, actually, Ginny, you were talking about Pat Ahern there. We know Pat because we did a residential course many, many years ago, and he actually came on it. So I think that it was our introduction to him, and he's just taken it, a lot further with his farm, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and he's just such a hoot. It's really fun.
He's a character.
Yeah, he's a real great advocate for homeopathy, and it's just great to see, especially a guy like a farmer, just out there like promoting homeopathy. It's like us women can say, "Oh, homeopathy is great," to a farmer, but just to actually see like a farmer bloke like say, "Use homeopathy, it's awesome. It saves me lots of money," and then a fellow farmer will go, "Oh yeah, great, give it a go." What is this trial that you're doing? You said we have a trial we're currently doing with UK farmers. What's happening there? Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is because I talk. Okay, so one day I was doing a webinar on the same webinar, the parasite, pests and diseases ones. And everyone was having a really hard time, in particular this last year with lice, because cattle were kept in stall for a long time. And, a lot of these parasites and wee beasties are a product of just being inside and too near each other for too long. It's like kids getting hair lice at school. So during compiling the information for the webinar, I'd come across a couple of papers, and it was working with a particularly nasty blood-sucking worm that I had experience of with a sheep farm I keep an eye on here. And because of the changing climate, I'd read that Australian farmers were now really concerned because the land was getting boggier because of higher rainfall, and it was more humid and warmer for longer, and we weren't getting the cold weather. And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, this sounds a bit like us. So at the end of this webinar, I said, if anyone is interested in trying these remedies, do you fancy having a go? And the response was great. So then Jayne and I together developed like a protocol. And it's very, very simple, because at the moment we called it a field study because it's not this big, posh, university-run thing. It's just a bunch of people, farmers and homeopaths and vet homeopaths. And we're just trying to see, particularly for this one type of worm, but it will also affect other worms too. So we're just using 2 remedies. One that we know will have a great affinity for the blood, and the second will have a great affinity for the digestive processes, because what this worm does is it actually gets into the gut and it interferes with the gut biome. So you get blood loss in the stool, therefore you get great weakness and the animals don't thrive. So the 2 main remedies we're using are ferrophos and arsenicum in combination, very simple, in water. Every time you move them, you in a fresh trough, you put more in, and the dosing couldn't be simpler. It's just diluting it in jam jars or whatever. It's not, we're not fussing here. We've got to make it really practical, really easy. And if you're in any doubt, if you have like heavy rainfall or you've got new stock that arrived, you dose it again. So it's very, very simple, Eugenie. We're keeping it simple. We just want people to walk the land, do the OBS, check the animals' rear ends, check their stools before they begin. And then during the trial, they keep checking and they keep looking. Now, I had this one sheep farm last year. We're in a meat club and they deliver our meat for us once a month. They do chickens and beef and stuff like this. And as he was standing on the door, said, this is how my life is. And I said, oh, by the way, Mark, I've got a little notion about running a field trial on worms. Do you fancy hopping on? And he said, yeah, what do I need? And he's getting in the car and I'm saying, arsenicum and ferrophos, mix them together. And he said, okay. So the whole summer goes on and we get into the autumn. And I said to him, oh, by the by, how did you get on with the remedies? Oh, he said, fantastic. No problems with worms this year. So on the strength of that, I thought, right, okay, we're going to tell other people about it. Now we have a third remedy, which we use on very, very young stock. So if they've been affected by the mothers being maybe struggling to overcome these worms before we start the trial, quite often the calves or the lambs are a little underweight and don't have that resilience. So we give them calc carb. So that's the only exception. When you notice an animal's not thriving, you pop them some calc carb in the water too. Otherwise, it's just those 2 remedies. So we're just appealing to everyone. So if it appeals to anyone listening to your podcast and they fancy having a go, then please contact me via HAWL and it will get to me and let me know how you're getting on.
Amazing. So give us all your contact details. Where can people get hold of you? How can they sign up for the course?
Yeah. Okay. So do you send out like a pro forma afterwards and stuff like that with contacts on?
It'll be in the show notes. So if you, you did send me through some things, which I'll put in the show notes. But if there's anything else you want on there, just let me know. But it's always just nice on the podcast itself as well to just let people know how they can get hold of you.
So for me, it's just very straightforward. If they're interested in it, it's Annie Batchelor, rshom@mac.com. They can also contact me via HAWL. That's the easiest thing. I'm also on WhatsApp, just as Annie Batchelor. And WhatsApp I use a lot in my practice because people send me photos and little videos of what's going on. And that's invaluable when you've got long distance patients. My patients are fairly international, but my kind of nub of my practice is here in Salisbury. So yeah, please contact me, and either by email or WhatsApp text, it will get to me. Or you can go via Jayne, and Jayne will give you her details.
Yeah, so to contact us at Homeopathy at Wellie Level, then we've also got a website, www.hawl.co.uk, and you can email me secretary@howl.co.uk. But I've given you that information as well, Eugenia, so
that's
you
on
can,
there as
you can
well.
send that out. And what I did want to say was what I love about HAWL and being involved with it is not just sharing, all of our knowledge and experience and helping people and animals, but also it's our support that we give afterwards. And the community that we've got now is probably nearly 800 farmers
Wow.
across the world who what we call them our HAWL family. They're HAWL farmers, whether they like it or not. They've done the course, they're ours. But they've also got their own little community. So, what we find is that a lot of courses will create their own WhatsApp group and they'll stay in touch, or a Facebook group. And we've got Facebook groups as well for either locations. So we've got one for the southwest of England. We've got one for Australia and New Zealand. We've got one for North America. We've got one that's sheep specific, dairy specific, beef cattle. And as Annie mentioned earlier, we do a lot of webinars which cover the topics that we just don't have time to in the course. It sort of it takes their knowledge that little bit further, dealing with specific issues like birthing remedies or parasites, as Annie did yesterday, and so on. And we've also got, which we're very fortunate, one of our homeopathic vets runs our homeopathic vet helpline for free. So, when people become members of HAWL, then they've got that ongoing homeopathic vet support, for forever, really, which is
That's
great.
incredible.
So it's just really, it's not just you do the course and we give you, we high five you and, we'll see you at some point, where it really is a community, which is what homeopathy is all about, isn't it?
It really is. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming and sharing this. This is great. I mean, like I said, it was ages ago that we had Rachel on. So it's been great to have like a little update and see what you're all up to. So I hope the farmers get on board. And at the end of the day, all of us win when the farmers are using healthier practices for all of us. So the animals win, the land wins, Mother Earth wins. We all win by eating healthier food. And it's just a win-win all around. So thank you for everything that you do.
Our pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Chat soon. Bye.
Bye.